You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Hey guys, so I have a relatively short video today because I'm learning some new gameplay recording and video editing software, but I wanted to go ahead and showcase and give you guys my impressions of Borderlands 2 running at 4K Ultra HD at 60 FPS. To be honest, I'm kinda stunned that this is possible, and I thought that 4K gaming at decent frame rates was maybe a year or two away. But to see it here right now is pretty amazing in my opinion, and I wanted to go ahead and share it with you guys. So for the uninitiated, 4K Ultra High Definition is 3820 by 2160p, which is 4 times the resolution of 1080p and 5 times the resolution of 720p. For the sake of reference, Borderlands 2 runs at 720p on the Xbox 360 at 30 frames per second, and it runs at 1080p on both PS4 and Xbox One with a target frame rate of 60 frames per second. The gameplay you're seeing here is 4 to 5 times the resolution of the console versions at 60 frames per second, as that is the maximum that YouTube will allow. Now, before we start with this video, I want to go ahead and talk about a couple things. All of the gameplay that you will see in this particular video is being recorded with NVIDIA Shadowplay. Before I talk about hardware, it's important to mention that I was not sent any of this for review, and I purchased all of it with my own money. I've got a Ryzen 1800X CPU, an MSI GTX 1080 Ti Gaming X, and I'm playing on Windows 10 with Borderlands 2 installed on a 1TB SSD. As far as I'm aware, none of my components are overclocked. However, I will say that my GTX 1080 Ti is running at a base clock of 1544 MHz, if you're curious about that. If you're interested in more technical specs or you have a question about the rest of my setup, go ahead and leave a comment below and I should be able to answer it for you. As far as my settings go, I have everything set to max. However, I do have PhysX set to low or off, mostly because of how it can interfere with gameplay. I'm sure a fair number of Borderlands 2 fans already know this, but if you don't, having PhysX turned on can affect the actual physics of grenade and rocket jumping. So if you plan on getting the maximum amount of air while performing rocket jumps, your best bet is to have PhysX disabled. Otherwise, all settings are maxed out with colorblind mode turned off and texture fade disabled. I suppose the last thing that needs to be mentioned is that I highly recommend that you set your picture quality on YouTube to 4K or whatever your device will reasonably allow. Even if you don't have a 4K monitor and if you can't watch this at the 4K resolution, you should be able to see some visual improvement over standard 1080p quality thanks to downscaling. But I guess with all the technical stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss how the game plays in 4K. Borderlands 2, along with Borderlands 1 and the pre-sequel, look really good in 4K thanks to their visual style. The biggest thing that I think you'll notice as we increase the resolution is how the black outlines tend to disappear and the image starts to look significantly sharper. 720p looks pretty blurry compared to 1080p, and while 1080p looks pretty good, you can tell how much sharper 4K looks. I would say the most notable benefit of 4K resolution is not so much in the foreground, where you can see your gun. However, the most noticeable visual improvements tend to appear in both the middle as well as the background. At 1080p, a distant group of buildings may actually look a little blurry. However, in 4K, you'll notice that they are much sharper and seem to pop a whole lot more. The interesting thing, though, is that you'll even notice the visual improvements in some enclosed areas like Washburn Refinery. A lot of the railing in Washburn is somewhat blurry at 1080p, however it's much sharper and more pronounced in 4K. Something that has always surprised me about Borderlands 2 is how well the textures seem to scale as you adjust the resolution. At 4K or even 1080p, you can walk up to various textures on walls and they are noticeably blurry. However, as you move further away from objects, their appearance looks really good and improves between 720p, 1080p, and of course 4K. Now, to be fair, Borderlands 2 is approaching 5 years old at this point, so I suppose it shouldn't really be too much of a surprise that the textures don't match newer display standards. But with that said, it makes me wonder how much better Borderlands 2 would look if Gearbox were to upgrade the overall texture quality of the game to better reflect what we're beginning to see on newer PCs, as well as even the new PS4 Pro and Xbox Scorpio that's set to come out later this year. Borderlands 2 was a really good looking game when it first came out in 2012, and I'd imagine if it got a few texture upgrades, it could look even better than it currently does. In the past, you could see visual improvements to Borderlands 2 by rendering the game in 4K. The problem though was that you either had to deal with 20 to 30 frames per second, or you had to run two really high-end graphics cards in SLI in order to get frame rates above 60. So I'll say that I'm pretty amazed that a single GTX 1080 Ti is powerful enough to run this game in most areas at a frame rate above 60. What's particularly impressive is how well the game runs in areas like Washburn Refinery, which is notorious for having major frame rate dips on consoles. I'm finding I stay pretty close to 60 FPS in this area, which is awesome if you ask me. That said, there does appear to be some weird optimization in some locations. Of the areas that I've played, I've noticed that heavy combat in the Beatdown and Bloodshot Stronghold tend to drop my frame rate below 60 for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why this is happening, but something you can see from the gameplay is that my GPU isn't being used to 99 or 100% of its capability when this happens. This could be an issue with Ryzen CPUs, it could be some weird thing with NVIDIA, or it could just be some other kind of optimization issue. Overall though, I'm still pretty impressed at how well things are running at such a high resolution. While frame drops do occasionally happen, I would say that playing Borderlands 2 at 4K resolution on a 1080 Ti is pretty smooth. My only complaint is that I wish that the average frame rate that I was hitting was 90 FPS or so compared to 60 to 65 FPS, as I think that would deliver a smoother experience and it would also eliminate a lot of the noticeable frame drops. That said, I do think if Borderlands 2 was optimized a little more for 4K, you might see some higher frame rates. Maybe not in the 90s, but you may see some in the mid 70s or so. Considering that 4K is not mainstream yet, what the 1080 Ti is doing here is really impressive. I'd say that if you were running 1080 Ti's and SLI and then you played Borderlands 2, you would be hard-pressed to have frame rates drop below 60. Okay, so here's the question. Is playing Borderlands 2 in 4K Ultra HD practical? Honestly, I don't think we're there just yet, but I do think that we're starting to get really close. The main issue right now is price. A standard or Founders Edition 1080 Ti from NVIDIA costs about $700. If you get a 1080 Ti with an aftermarket cooler like I did, you could spend an additional $50 to $80 more than that. That said, the Titan X Pascal and the Titan XP are both graphics cards that cost more than twice as much, and the former may actually perform worse when compared to the 1080 Ti. If you're a console gamer and you're watching this, for the price of a GTX 1080 Ti, you could buy both a PS4 Pro and an Xbox One S. Or if you're just getting into PC gaming, you could buy a fairly decent gaming PC for the same price as a GTX 1080 Ti. Granted, neither of these things will do 4K at 60 FPS, especially for most of the modern AAA games that are coming out today. I'd say that within the next year or two, we're going to start to see 4K 60 FPS capable cards that are a heck of a lot more affordable though. When $300 to $400 cards come out and they can run most games at 4K 60 FPS at max settings, then you will know that 4K has officially arrived and is definitely practical and viable. I'd also suspect by that point that 4K HDR monitors are going to be more of a thing, and maybe they'll be more widespread, because right now, there have been some 4K HDR capable monitors that were announced that were in like the prototype stage. However, they're like insanely expensive, and I don't even think they're actually products, which is weird. But I digress. Overall, I'm pretty impressed that playing Borderlands 2 at 4K 60 FPS with a fairly stable frame rate is possible. My old PC has a GTX 770 that can max out Borderlands 2 at 1080p, however it mostly sits around the 30 FPS range while playing Borderlands 2 in 4K. Granted, there are moments that it will peak at 50 FPS, but that tends to be when you're directly facing a wall. During combat, the 770 would drop down to like 20 FPS, which basically made the game unplayable. I think what I am surprised by is how playable this game is at 4K with the 1080 Ti. I suspected that my frame rates would be a lot better than they were with the 770, but I don't think I suspected to be able to run Borderlands 2 at a relatively stable 60 FPS in 4K. To be honest, I was sort of shocked when I looked at the frame rate counter for the first time. Hopefully, Borderlands 2 will get some better optimization for 4K as 4K gaming starts to become more mainstream. It's a great looking game, and I think it would greatly benefit from a little more optimization. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like. Real quick before we go, I'm working on learning some new video editing software, so it may take a little longer to get these videos together at first, but things will eventually pick up, and I'll be producing videos at a more regular rate. But again, guys, thank you for supporting this video. Again, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see you all next time.